Southern man better.
He's a Canadian musical icon who's been one of the most acclaimed and influential rock musicians in history. He's also a committed activist on issues ranging from racism to the environment to an entire anti-war album called Living with War. Now Neil Young has Canada's oil sands in his sights and support for the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation in their legal defense against big oil. He's launched a 4-city tour of Canada called Honor the Treaties, where all proceeds go to the ACFN. The first of those shows happened on the weekend at Toronto's Massey Hall.
I held my breath with my eyes closed.
I sat down with Neil Young for his only one-on-one interview before that show.
Neil, thanks very much for doing this. Good to see you
Thank you.
again. Toronto, Winnipeg, Regina, Calgary, Honor the Treaties tour. Tell me why it felt like this was the time for this concert series.
Well, it's late. The concert series is way behind. This concert series should have happened years ago when all of the things that are happening now started. This is just to bring awareness to people who care in Canada and people who may not be aware of what is going on in the West.
In September, you visited Fort McMurray to tour the oil sands and surrounding Aboriginal communities. First of all, what compelled you to take that trip?
I was doing a film about CO2 and its effects on civilization. And Fort McMurray, when I say Fort McMurray, I'm referring to the oil sands, the tar sands, and the industrial projects going on around there.
Did you know how you felt about the oil sands before you went there?
I just knew that I wanted to see them. I wanted to know what was going on. I wanted to see what it was. I hadn't heard that many good things about it.
Describe for us what you saw when you got to Fort McMurray, when you got to the oil sands.
Well, first of all, when I got to Fort McMurray, I'd driven my electric car up there using an alternative fuel, renewable fuel, to get there, because that's what our film was about. When I got out of the car, the first thing I smelled was fuel. And then I realized that was the air. So that was in Fort McMurray, which is 25 miles away from the nearest site. And I could smell it. And it was hurting, it was burning my eyes, and I could feel it in my throat.
Given your position in the past on the environment, you have been outspoken about this. I mean, whether it's the smell that you smelled, you just described, or whether it's what you saw, did any of that surprise you?
It all surprises me. This is Canada. This is a huge surprise for me. I'm from Canada, I'm Canadian, so I'm proud of Canada. I speak as a Canadian. When I'm in the United States and I'm saying something about the government down there, I'm not shy to say I'm from Canada. But if they have what they call the leader of the free world running their country, I feel like I'm part of the free world, so I have a voice. So I can say whatever I want wherever I am. But in Canada, I speak as a Canadian. I always felt that Canada was a different place, and where the values were different, and that we cherished the natural surroundings that we're in. But my visit to Alberta changed a lot of that for me.
You feel like that's a myth now?
It's a myth there, and I think it's a myth in a lot of places where people still believe it. They just don't see what's going on. They don't have their eyes open. And they have so much misinformation coming to them from the government. Why don't they talk about what's happened to science in the government? This government has ignored science to the point where science is not even an issue. And science is the backbone of our future.
Well, let me get to some of what you said, because in a speech at a National Farmers Union event in Washington, of course, now famously or infamously perhaps, you compared Fort McMurray to Hiroshima.
Fort McMurray looks like Hiroshima. Fort McMurray is a wasteland. The Indians up there and the native peoples are dying.
Have you ever been to the tar sands?
I've not.
Maybe you should go see what you think.
Do you stand by that comparison?
I recommend a trip there.
Do you stand by the comparison to Hiroshima?
Absolutely. The thing that was that I thought that most people would realize is that Fort Mac is a word that represents the oil sands. What is going on around it is That's what I was referring to as a wasteland. It is the ugliest environmental disaster that I not only have ever seen, but that I could even comprehend. It is huge.
So Neil, you know, to some people those words were incendiary. The Alberta Energy Minister Ken Hughes called that comparison deeply offensive to those killed in World War II. A local radio station banned your music. How do you react to those reactions?
I don't even react to them. They don't mean anything to me. It's senseless. It's a man in a position like that, who's elected by the people of the province of Alberta, should be able to tell the difference between a metaphor and a direct quote. If he doesn't understand that Fort Mac stands for the oil sands, then he doesn't even know where he lives. That was a ridiculous thing to do. And as far as burning my, whatever they want to do with my records, I could care less.
Doesn't bother you when people
Doesn't
want to
bother
ban
me
your
at
music?
all. I say they missed the point. The
What
point
about when they
is-
say you crossed the line? What about when they say, I like
What
his music,
line?
but
What
stay
line?
out of politics?
What
Neil?
line did I cross? Musicians should stay out of politics? Is that right? Is that somebody said that? So is,
More than a
is
few
that,
have said
is that
that.
one of the is that a great Canadian belief? is that it that your profession is should be considered and weighed carefully when deciding whether you have freedom of speech? That just doesn't make sense to me. Those are ludicrous comments that have nothing to do with reality. Those are defensive maneuvers, deflecting the truth away from people's sense of what's going on. People should wonder, what am I up there for? Have I always written about and sung about what concerned me? From Ohio to Southern Man, to Rockin' in the Free World, to all of these crazy songs that I wrote about things that were going on that people sang, that I sang, to all the things that I said. Are they saying that now that those were all bebop-a-lula and I shouldn't talk about anything? What? That's ridiculous.
Let me ask you about some specifics of what you're doing, because after your visit, you decided to partner with the AFCN, the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, and play a role in the cause with these concerts. They didn't ask you to partner. You wanted to take that step. Tell me about wanting to partner with them.
I volunteered. I was sitting with the chief and the TP on the reserve. I was hearing the stories. I saw that the cancer rate was up among all the tribes. This is not a myth. This is true. You can either believe me and the First Nations people, or you can believe the oil companies and the Canadian government. And you got to look at the motivation. Why would anybody say anything? Why would I say anything? And why would the First Nations people say anything if there wasn't something wrong? And then look at the motivation of the Canadian government and the oil companies that they're working with.
Neil, there are people who talk about, I'm talking local residents, members of government, as you said, opinion columnists, who argue that the protests don't show the whole picture. They argue that First Nations benefit from the oil sands. What do you say to those who believe the oil sands are more helpful than hurtful when it comes to...
Well, I say to them, I'm never going to tell you what to believe. I'm not telling anybody anything. What I do attempts to show things. It brings light to things. People make their own judgments. I don't tell people what to think. I'm only saying what I think. It's up to Canadians all across Canada to make up their own minds about whether their integrity is threatened by a government that won't live up to the treaties that this country is founded on. The treaties with the First Nations people. What I found was a bunch of people that were being persecuted and lied to and misled.
I don't think anyone disagrees that the oil sands have environmental impact, even those who support them. But we have a cultural dependence on oil. We have a system based on oil.
Why? Because it exists?
Yes.
That's not a good enough reason for me. I disagree with the reason behind us feeling that we're dependent on oil. That's a basic problem. For me, as a thinking person, as a person who's looking into the future, who's looking out for my grandchildren, who's looking out for the future of Canada and the United States and everybody that I meet, that's who I am. I look at it that way.
I guess the question is, if it's something that big, that systemic, that revolutionary to change.
That's who we are. That's what we do.
Let me ask you again about when we talk about the role of musicians. I wanted to quote you because you had this fantastic speech in 2011 when you were presented with the Alan Waters Humanitarian Award at the Junos. You said, Neil, musicians should not worry about helping others. They should focus on their music first.
Yeah.
Then if you're lucky and you have an opportunity, it's a good thing to go ahead and try to do something yourself. Tell me about where that art before activism idea fits in terms of what you're doing right now with this concert.
That's right on. It's exactly right. When I woke up this morning, I was thinking about music. Music flies around in my head. Words fly around in my head. I can't help it. That's what I dedicate my life to, because that's my strongest tool of communication. I've written a whole album about oil. It's called Fork in the Road. It was out like 4 years ago. I'm making a movie about CO2. These are things that bother me. I'm concerned for my grandchildren. I think you should be concerned for yours, and I think all Canadians should be concerned for theirs.
One very last question. You're such an influential guy. People are going to listen to what you're saying. You have fans, you have followers, you have people who are interested in what you're saying. What do you want people to do?
First of all, I would like them to make up their own minds. They have the God-given gift to think for themselves. All I'm saying is, this is what I'm seeing. I've been there. I've studied this. I couldn't believe it, so I got more into it. That place and those workers, I have a lot of respect for the workers. But I can't get behind workers that are digging a hole that my grandchildren are never going to be able to climb out from under. They'll never be able to get back to the blue sky. That's what's happening right now.
Thank you for this.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance.